8 years after US and NATO forces toppled the Taliban, Afghanistan held its second major elections since 2001. But far from being a symbol of democracy, the August 20th elections have been marred by accusations of massive fraud and concerns over President Hamid Karzais' reliance on the support of warlords and suspected war criminals. This is an excerpt from a report by independent journalist Rick Rowley of Big Noise Films called Return of the Warlords. It airs in full on Al Jazeera English today.
The road to Shebbegan cuts through the high, arid plain of northern Afghanistan. This is the stronghold of Afghanistan's most notorious warlord, General Rashid Dostum, who has been a powerful player in the country's politics for 3 decades. The road is littered with reminders of Dostum's many battles, the husks of Russian armored vehicles and abandoned mud and stone fortresses where Dostum based his troops. General Dostum has been living in exile in Turkey for the last 9 months because of ongoing criminal and human rights investigations against him. But he was invited back into the country by President Hamid Karzai 2 days before this year's presidential elections. 8 years after the US invasion, the 2009 elections were supposed to showcase a democratic central government that had ended 30 years of warlord rule, violence, and impunity. But Karzai has relied heavily in this campaign on the support of regional strongmen. We managed to catch the general as he slips out of the compound, the first television interview he has given since his dramatic return.
We
were in negotiations over my endorsement of President Karzai for almost 2 months. I can say that I will bring him more than 2 million votes.
Dostum often speaks of himself in the third person and says that those who criticize his return from exile are afraid of the role he will play in securing the country.
They are Taliban and Taliban sympathizers. The Taliban is not worried about NATO, but it is afraid of General Dostum. When, God forbid, the situation deteriorates again, it is better to have General Dostum on your side if you really want security and victory in Afghanistan.
General Dostum isn't running for office, but there are more pictures of him on the walls of Shebbegan than any political candidate.
General Dostum is a good man. He is our leader. He served in Afghanistan, and we really love him.
No one we meet is shy about telling us where their allegiances lie, or who they will be voting for in the elections tomorrow.
Yes, I vote for Karzai. Whatever Dostum orders, we will obey.
We could not find anyone in Shebbegan with a critical word to say about the general. Dostum's influence among a large sector of the population here is undeniable, but the unanimity in the streets of Shebbegan was strangely troubling. We did eventually find a large community of northern Afghans who were critical of the general, 600 kilometers from Shebbegan, in these refugee camps. The UN says that 17,000 families, around 75,000 people from Dostum's region in northern Afghanistan, are now crowded into these low mud brick buildings. There is no work here, no hospitals, and no schools. We asked them how they ended up here.
You
must be new here to be asking that question. The whole world knows that we were driven here by General Dostum, his soldiers and his commanders.
These Pashtun refugees say that Dostum ruled in the north as a warlord, that they were targeted by his Uzbek militia, who saw them both as ethnic enemies and as potential threats to Dostum's power. They say that his men looted their villages and their livestock, killed his political opponents, and drove them from their land by force.
My child and relatives died under Dostum's gun. We were driven from our homes during a hard winter and traveled through the snow-filled desert. Our people died on the way, and we didn't have time to bury them. The wolves ate the bodies of our men, women, and children.
The families here fear that with Dostum's return to Afghanistan, they will never be able to go home. Dostum is a controversial character. Many call him a warlord, but he has influential allies who disagree. Back in Kabul, Dostum's most powerful supporter, President Hamid Karzai, addresses the nation in the last televised debate before the election. Karzai says that men like Dostum are not warlords. They are national heroes and a necessary part of any future government. His opponents disagree.
For Afghanistan, it is a disaster. The same criminal of war today, they return in power. You saw the return of Dostum, for example, the return of Fahim in power. This election is a disaster for Afghan people, for human rights values, for freedom.
Ramazan Bashardost ran third in the polls prior to this year's fraud-tainted presidential election. He was once a member of Karzai's cabinet, but was forced to resign because of his sharp criticism of the international community's role in Afghanistan. He says that economic and military aid, as well as reconstruction contracts, have been funneled through warlords, making it impossible for a democratic central government to develop.
If the international community doesn't support the warlord, doesn't finance the warlord, doesn't pay the salary of bodyguard of warlord, I'm absolutely sure that Afghan people can find their way.
Until that happens, Bashardost sees warlord rule as inevitable and the democratic process as inherently undermined.
Who is the governor? Who is the chief of police in Afghanistan? Who is the chief of district? Who is deputy minister? Who is minister? They are warlords in Afghanistan.
Election day is bloody across Afghanistan, with over 400 attacks in 24 hours. But Sheberghan remains calm. Pictograms on the wall tell voters to denounce acts of intimidation as General Dostum's supporters show up to cast their votes. Before the results have even started to trickle in, the accusations of fraud begin. In the initial numbers, it appears that Karzai is winning handily. Dostum has delivered his region in the north, and the Pashtun south is also solidly in Karzai's column. But irregularities quickly multiply, and the scale of the apparent fraud is stunning. UN officials warn that as many as 1 in every 3 votes may be fraudulent.
Petty fraud is one thing, but this was a deep and shameful fraud.
Mohammed Atta is the current governor of Balkh province. He was also a key warlord ally of the U.S. during the invasion, but he has fought with Dostum over control of territory in the north. It has been rumored that Karzai may give the governorship of Balkh to Dostum as part of the deal he struck for support in the elections.
The people of Balkh will not accept this infamous thief, bandit, and looter as their leader. It is much better to be ruled by the Taliban than by Dostum.
All of this only complicates matters for Washington. In 2002, dozens died in armed clashes between Dostum and Atta's forces, and a full-scale civil war nearly erupted as both leaders deployed tanks to the capital of Balkh province. A return of that kind of violence in the midst of the current Taliban resurgence could be devastating. The Obama administration has voiced its concern about the return of General Dostum, signaling, perhaps, a departure from the Bush administration's so-called warlord strategy. Ambassador James Dobbins was George Bush's first envoy to Afghanistan. He prefers not to use the term warlord as he lays out the former administration's approach.
You do need a strategy in Afghanistan that's bottom-up as well as top-down. That is, in addition to creating a more competent central administration that can project services to the population, you also need to create local sources of authority.
But even under the Bush administration, some of the dangers in this bottom-up strategy became clear.
There have been tension between Atta and Dostum before, and indeed it was a major source of concern to the United States back in early 2002.